I'm going to call our Planning Commission CIP work session to order. Heather, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Bowe?
Here.
Mr. Hamilton?
Here.
Mr. Tarley? Mr. Boswell?
Here.
Mr. Granger?
Here.
Ms. Liebel?
Here.
Mr. Phillips?
Okay, thank you. This is a work session. I know some of you have joined the commission since we had our last work session. This is much less formal, much less structured. We're not on live television, so your fan base will have to listen to the recording and look at the minutes. This is the annual opportunity that staff presents us information that we need for the capital improvement program for the fiscal year 26 to 30, and we have the opportunity to add our comments in, which typically they read and carefully consider, and occasionally even act on. So, Mr. Trivett, would you like to, if you could make your way through the crowd to the podium? I believe you're giving the presentation today. Is that right?
Sure, absolutely. Yes, sir. Would you prefer that I go to the podium, or is it okay if I just sit here?
Last time you went to the podium, so
yeah, I can do it either way.
It's your choice. Yeah.
I did bring some assistance today. So what I thought we would do is, I know that Davin in the finance office provided a PowerPoint, and it's basically the CIP spreadsheet by spreadsheet, and I don't know that it's terribly helpful to go through it that way. What I thought we would do is just sort of run through the memorandum and then answer any questions you all have. Is that okay?
Are you planning on addressing the items that were in our
yes,
24 letter? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so just to summarize, basically the FY25 adopted CIP budget had a total of $27 million worth of projects, $27.5 million worth of projects, and that included $12.3 for city CIP project completion during that operating year. Much of that work has been completed or is underway now, but there's always a whole host of projects that don't get quite completed on time, and even more importantly, there are some that don't spend all the money that was allocated, and that money typically rolls forward and then falls into the fund balance for the CIP. That savings every year is part of what makes the CIP process work. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we talk about what I sort of see as the dangers for the CIP moving forward. I thought we would just go through some of the projects that are underway or have been completed that I consider to be important, and then of course we can talk about any that you all think need to be addressed. One of those is under Public Works, and that is the Capitol Landing and Bypass Road intersection. That's a project that sort of gets mixed together with the Capitol Landing Road corridor improvement. And for us, there really is no difference. Those two projects are moving basically at the same speed to be completed at the same time. Right now, we're waiting on federal approvals, or we would already be well underway in actual construction of that project. So we'll see how that progresses. Unfortunately, we're at the mercy of the federal forces to decide that the project can proceed. We've provided everything that needs to be provided, and are just waiting on that. In association with that project, there's another project that we would like to see completed, and that is to add to that intersection that's being created there at Capitol Pancake House to create its own spur directly into the visitor center. That was always part of the plan, and so we're working to modify that design to accomplish that. Also, of course, I want to mention the Monticello Avenue, Richmond Road, Lafayette Street roundabout. That's still a project that's on the horizon, fully funded by Smart Scale as it stands right now. One of the things, and I think this is really a hurdle for Smart Scale projects generally, is they are approved so far in the past that by the time the project actually rolls around to being funded, there's a discrepancy in what was budgeted then versus what the actual cost is today. And every locality in the Commonwealth, I think, is wrestling with VDOT on how to address that. This project will probably be no exception to that problem, and so it'll be interesting to see how we overcome it with VDOT. Another one that I wanted to talk about from this section is the Public Works Infrastructure Master Plan. This is a project where we're really looking at what elements of the utility system need to be addressed and in what order, and what kind of cost should we be expecting. That's important because as we present the overall city budget this year, I think this is going to dominate the attention of the public, because obviously if you're paying attention to our budget process, every year we talk about the utility system, but it's sort of an addendum to the overall general fund budget, which gets most of the attention, and that's generally because not a lot changes. However, our utility rate is the lowest in the region by a generous margin, and in order to accomplish some of these generational improvements that we need to make, we're probably going to have to raise the rate, and so that's going to generate a lot of conversation, largely based on the work that's being done by the consultant reviewing all of that infrastructure right now. Moving on to the next section, which is corridor enhancement and underground wiring. I did want to talk about crosswalks and in-road warning systems. Your memo, which I'm going to talk about when I get through this review, did highlight some particular safety aspects of the community you wanted to address. And I just thought I would point to this one as a good example of the Public Works Department looking for innovative solutions to improve safety on our most heavily trafficked pedestrian areas. So what this is installing warning lights actually in the pavement. Right now we have lots of places, growing places, where we have crosswalks that we call active crosswalks that have indicator lights on the posts. A student or a pedestrian has to hit the button and then the lights start to flash, alerting the cars that somebody's trying to cross. This would do the same thing, but have lights actually embedded in the roadway too. And in communities that are doing this, it has improved safety. I think one of the concerns of the department and mine is how much maintenance and whatnot will be included in that, because when you embed a light system into the ground, there's obvious opportunity for water intrusion. If you allow cars to drive over it, even more so. So we'll see how that goes. We're sort of considering this to be a pilot program. Hopefully the technology has caught up and it'll be a good investment and improve safety, and we can deploy it in more places around town.
Have you gotten to the point where you know where you're going, where the initial ones are going to be?
So we're certainly looking at Jamestown Road and Richmond Road. I don't know that we've picked a specific one. It would probably be one of the ones that's already lit on the post, because the hard wiring is already there. It'll reduce our cost to test it. So that's what we're thinking.
I'm curious, what is the cost of like one of those? Like if the budget is $150,000 for those, how many does that get us?
We hope to do 3 with that budget amount.
These are not cheap improvements.
And since we're asking questions on this one, if I may.
Yeah, please.
Is there a way to, the biggest downfall to those that I find is getting people to push the button.
Right.
And if there's a solution for that, that would be incredible. Or such as, oh, there's a sensor that can detect a person as opposed to a dog or a bicycle, something, because I regularly see them just walk right on past and can't even push the button. Come on, people. So
that technology does exist, and we have talked about trying that. It's interesting, though, because when I talk to people about doing that, they either are in the camp of that's fantastic because nobody pushes the button, or they say, well, it'll just be activated all the time because somebody's walking by or what have you. So I think a combination of both maybe is where we'll be looking. And then, if it doesn't work, we tried it and we'll take it down and try something else. That's part of the whole process. Trial and error.
yeah, I like the idea of trying it on at least one and seeing what sort of results we get from it.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think it'll be worthwhile. And there are communities that are using the sensors, and they seem to work. So
If I had to choose between a sensor for what we have or lights in the road, I'd pick a sensor for what we have.
sure.
I wonder about the cost difference for that, because I also it's like a culture around not pressing the button, right? Like that's a decision that people make consciously. But if the trend is toward, they see other people do it and then that becomes the norm, then you create that behavior and instill that culture. So if it, in a perfect world, were the same cost, but I'm sure that the sensors are not expensive. I'm just curious how much those are.
Yeah, it's
compared to
far
what
less
you're
expensive
putting in
to
now,
install a
which is-
sensor on a sign that already has a button
Yeah.
than it is to put in the wiring and install the lighting in the roadway. I agree with you. I think the culture is changing. It seems like every year more and more people are hitting the button.
It's like
So-
you have to take some kind of personal accountability when you're crossing the road too. Like if all it is that you have to press a button, that's not a huge ask.
A few years ago, I don't think we did it this year, but I could be wrong. We actually did a campaign with the police department where we bought some pedestrian type stuff like reflective tape and little flashing beacons and whatnot. We printed some brochures on pedestrian safety and your obligation as a pedestrian. And we had the police officers stand at the major crosswalks and hand that out a couple days. And that seemed to help too, actually. During the year, we saw a lot of people with those reflectors on their bags and whatnot. So that's another thing that we could go back to try.
Can I go back hit on something you mentioned a minute ago?
Certainly.
Roundabout. That was figured out 5 years ago now.
I think it was 2016 or 17, the original application and approval. Yeah.
Is there any possibility that the elements that would be considered to engineer that out have changed in that time and need to be looked at?
It's possible, but I don't think they would change in a way that would say this no longer is viable. I think if
Okay.
anything, traffic has increased, and that would just further support the idea of changing the pattern there. So I don't think, yes, absolutely, that's a problem with the smart scale. It's something I have been saying at all of our regional meetings is smart scale system. I don't think it's a bad system, but now that we've worked on it for as long as we have, it's starting to become cumbersome in terms of its deployment. And I really worry that if VDOT and the state doesn't do something, it's going to collapse because it just, in its current format, I don't think it's sustainable because the timeline between approval and award of funds gets longer and longer with every round. I mean, at some point, it's just not going to be sustainable. And
It's interesting that you say that, but from the public opinion perspective too, how many residents have moved or, away or to the
Right.
area and they didn't know anything about that project, or people were invested and then left and that opinion is gone. And so there's a whole new, I saw an article about it a week or two ago, and all the comments, you know what I mean? Because nobody, thinks, oh, well, this was approved 8 years ago.
right. And so we
Court of
battle
public
it.
opinion has changed too, not just the cost required to actually accomplish it.
Right. We battle that, of
Yeah.
course,
And
with
now
any of
you're
our
gonna have to
projects. but-
essentially do it again when,
Sure. Yeah, we have to go through the whole process again, and not just the public changes, but the people sitting at the dais that voted for it change. And so,
Right.
what do you do when their perspective changes? And we're going to find out, I think, as we're going to be presenting this particular topic to the city council in February, in preparation for renewing support for the project or not. So it'll be interesting to see how that turns out. Yeah. One of the things, I mean, this is a soapbox of mine, but one of the things I have suggested that I think is a pretty simple change and won't help everybody because not everybody can do this. But what I said is VDOT has a very strict policy about not reimbursing expenses. Well, what if the communities who could afford to proceed with projects that are approved under Smart Scale proceeded at their own cost and then got reimbursed when the money was available? That seems like it would take a lot of pressure off the state and the system for those communities that can. And like I say, not everybody would be able to. These projects are pretty expensive, but some might be able to. Williamsburg would be able to do some and not others probably. But you think about like Fairfax County, they get a Smart Scale award. Why shouldn't they be able to proceed and then just be reimbursed 5 years later when the money becomes available, or 7 years later when the money becomes available? So maybe someday that'll catch on. We did talk a little bit about that at our regional meeting, adding that to a legislative agenda in a future year. So we'll see. So the next project I want to talk about is under pedestrian and bicycle improvements, and just the Collegewood Circuit Shared Use Trail. And this gets sort of wrapped up in the Birthplace of America Trail, which is now called Trail 757. This is a pretty significant priority for the city council, is to figure out how to carry the Capitol Trail from where it terminates now through the city. The region has really attached to this idea too, and now the whole project is being driven by the HRPDC. One thing that has changed, I think, since we really started working on this is that the HRPDC, in their submission of grant applications to federal and state funding authorities, they were told, stop applying for little tiny pieces in Newport News or Hampton and then a piece in Williamsburg. Work systematically from the front to the back. They want to see that it's all going to connect. And so that's actually helped us because now they've really focused on, okay, what's next and what's ready. And Williamsburg has been working on this long enough now that we have a fairly decent plan on how to get from A to B once you're inside Williamsburg. And so with their partnership, I'm really optimistic that we're going to get to see this project move forward finally. And of course, Public Works has been really great about looking at all different kinds of options, including how we might change the striping to accommodate the trail without major costs. So I think that we'll start to see some of this advance pretty quickly in the coming years. Next is under Recreation and Culture. I just want to talk a little bit about, we've got several projects listed under Quarter Path Park, and a lot of those projects we have pressed the hold button on, primarily because many of them have to do with improving the Quarter Path Park facility, right, the building itself. And the question is, what's the future of that building after the regional sports center is open? Because right now, the programming is provided at the Quarter Path Rec Center will be provided at the sports center instead. And so before we do a major investment, we need to make sure we're putting that money into the building's use that's planned for the future. So a lot of those things have been held off. Not everything, of course. We did open the bathrooms in the back of the building to serve the outside this past year, and I think that's been a big success. And some more improvements are planned for those outdoor facilities. But anything having to do with the building has been put on hold until that future decision can be made. Under public safety, we have to talk about the police station, of course, and if you've driven Lafayette Street, you've seen it's under construction. It seems like it gets bigger every day, which I guess is the point. So excited to see that one get wrapped up and the police station have a new home. Associated with that project is the one right under it, and that is relocation and renovation of the Public Works storage yard. Impacted by the placement of the police station, it gave us the opportunity to really review their facilities and decide on some upgrades there. So hopefully in the next year, we'll see an RFP for that to get done, and we'll get that accomplished as well.
Can I ask a silly question?
Sure.
Not fully relevant, but after the demolition of this police station, is there a plan for redevelopment of that property yet?
Sure. Yeah, we used to talk about this a lot, so I'll drop back and say the city is engaged in a generational renewal of its infrastructure. That's what's happening right now. Unfortunately, all of it was sort of installed at the same time, and we've made the same mistake again of having to renew it at the same time. It would have been wiser for future generations if we had built the police station maybe 20 years ago, and then started to break these up into better pieces to bite off. But if you look back at the city's sort of debt profile, you can see this occur where they've borrowed money to build these facilities and then pay it off, and then they ride it out, and then they have to do it again. So that's sort of where we are. So that process began with the fire station, which is now complete. The police station is next. And sort of like dominoes, once the police station is done, we will demolish that building. And the idea is that that will likely be the site of a new library, which would take the place of this library. That process is underway right now. There's an evaluation committee that's currently reviewing the submitted proposals. We did receive 3. The evaluation committee has narrowed that down to 1, and we're working with that proposer, and I think they're going to present to us this week. Is it this week or next? I can't remember now. It's one of the two. Either this week or next week, their current version and answer to some of the questions the evaluation committee asked. One of the things that's being considered relative to that project is what's the best placement of the library? Because without the police station, essentially the whole block that's not occupied by the Stryker Center is available. And so the evaluation committee wants to know what makes the most sense in terms of placement. Is it this corner? Is it sort of in the middle where the library is now? Or is it over here with a direct connection to the Stryker Center? And so that's one of the questions that'll be answered in this review process. So once that's done, then the next project on the list is to tear down and rebuild the Blayton building, which has the same era. We spend a lot of time on emergency calls there, rescuing people from the elevator, and we'd like to get out of that business, as would they, I'm sure. So that's the progress of city facilities, really. Once that's done, then we sort of get to take a break.
Thank you.
Yeah. So speaking of the Blayton building, I wanted to talk a little bit under community and economic development, the RHA laundromat facilities. The WRHA for a long time was an independent authority and became, got to the point where it was not financially viable for it to remain independent and became a quasi component of the city. And we're sort of still in the middle of merging the two entities. They never really took final steps. And so we've been working toward that year over year. And that includes more funding from the city helping offset their cost. And so every year there are more projects like this one where they come to the city and ask for assistance. The laundromat project, I think, is one that we can all be pretty proud of. What this does is allow the residents to do their laundry at home. instead of having to go to a facility. They won't have laundry facilities in their units, but there'll be a facility on site that they can go and use. Right now, the Blayton building is the only one that has that service. So when you think about, a person getting on a bus with all their laundry and going somewhere to do it and spend half a day doing laundry and then going home, this is going to completely change the way that they live. So I'm pretty excited about this and the opportunity to help out the WRHA make an improvement there. Under general government, one of the projects I want to talk about is the first one, the municipal building renovations. This is a little bit misleading because it says there 5.9 is the budget for that project, and it is not. We had borrowed pretty much all of the money for several projects at one time, and the municipal building renovations is one of those. It's really about 1.8 that's available. The rest of that money was associated with the police department project. And so this is another one that we're currently underway evaluating what we'd like to do. We've presented a number of options to City Council. They've asked us questions and said go back and figure out another solution. And so we're currently looking at how we can better use the municipal building space to maximize what we're doing where. The third floor, if you've never been up there, is a space that for a long time was used for the City Council meeting chambers. And now is available for other uses. Now, we've got a lot of office folks up there, staff members in makeshift offices with, recycled carpet squares that don't match, drywall that's not been painted. I mean, it's not exactly impressive space. So we've got to deal with that one way or another, and I'm hopeful that as we look at the whole building and the placement of all the departments, we'll find that by moving some folks around, we can actually maximize efficiencies for serving the public and create some additional space to meet those needs, not just today, but into the future. So we'll see how that turns out. Another project under that category is bus stop improvement. This is another one where I think that we can be proud when we're done. We were a little bit surprised as we began to study the issue that there's over 70 bus stops in the city. I think most people would have guessed a much smaller number than that. But even more importantly is that as we did the review, we find that they don't all have the same amenities. Very few of them have structures, very few of them have pads, even less have trash cans. So if you've driven my favorite route, which was 60 as you come in, that's a very popular route, and there are plenty of spots along the way that are WADA bus stops that don't have a shelter and they don't have a pad, and on a rainy day people are standing in the ditch with water up to their ankles, and I think we can do better than that. And so improving those bus stops to a standard of service inside the city, I think, is a good first step, and the City Council has been generous in providing funding to get that done. So over the next few years, we're going to do a couple of stops each year, and eventually we'll get to the number that we need where most of those stops have those basic sort of services. And then the last project that I wanted to talk about from the list is under schools and our contribution there. Obviously, that's a major investment, and coming forward as the school system considers preschool additions to alleviate overcrowding, which was one of the items that you talked about in your memo last year. At the elementary level, the idea being that by taking preschool students out of the existing elementary schools where they're housing those, it'll free up space for those classrooms to serve more elementary students. That's not the case at Matthew Whaley, which of course is a major concern of ours. That's a city school where a lot of city students attend. Not all city elementary students go there. And so the obvious question is, well, how will building pre-K classrooms, other places, free up space at Matthew Whaley? And the only answer is through redistricting. And so for this to be successful, there will be a redistricting that reassigns students. And that means probably even less city students will attend Matthew Whaley and be distributed throughout the system to create those capacity gains. So that's just something to be aware of as we move forward.
May I ask a question on that?
Certainly.
I had the impression, and it could be a misinformation or misthought on my part, that with the upcoming contract that the students who were in the city were going to primarily be educated in the city as opposed to bused outside the city primarily. There might be a few exceptions, but for the most part, our city students will be educated in our city buildings.
That's certainly a consideration, but not something that's been agreed to or negotiated yet. So I'm just talking about the current contract, right?
Okay.
And then I just want to turn to look at your memo from last year and talk about some of that. So the first category that you had was under safety, and you talked about how we could handle sidewalks and whatnot along Lafayette Street, Page Street, Matthew Whaley. You talked about Merrimack Trail, Mill Neck, and Jamestown Road. All of these are areas that in the last year we have looked really hard at and made some improvements, not all that probably the Planning Commission would like us to make. So we'll just walk through some of them. For Matthew Whaley, we did install an active crosswalk just recently at the intersection there. That was requested by the school system itself and a lot of the parents. The school board also supported that, and I think it's made a big difference. We've gotten a lot of support from that, from those groups thanking us for the work there. Along Merrimack Trail, we did not make a tremendous amount of progress, but in this coming CIP, Public Works Department is submitting an item that will allow us to do a complete review of Merrimack Trail and make improvements where the sidewalks are deficient, either not existent or too narrow or broken up, what have you. So that's an area that we'll be looking at in the next fiscal year. Mill Neck Road and Jamestown Road, we did work with some neighbors and talked about what we could do in terms of signage and whatnot, and so far we've not found a good solution. So we're going to continue to work on that with the residents in that neighborhood. On Jamestown, of course, we've done quite a bit of improvement there. We've added a crosswalk. We've talked with William & Mary and the Student Assembly about eliminating a crosswalk once the construction of the dorm is done. And then, of course, adding to the active features, these embedded lights, I think will make another big difference. And one of the things that surprised us that we did do that got a lot of attention and support was, if you've driven it, the standing signs that are now in the middle also help break up the roadway and force people to slow down. And so we did that there. We also did that on Long Hill and have gotten tremendous feedback from the residents that use those areas that has been really helpful in slowing down the traffic.
So let me just interject there. I think our concern was more in the other direction on Jamestown from the business school west or out toward 199.
Oh, okay.
The high speed of traffic coming down that hill.
Oh, sure. Yeah, right.
I call it Jamestown obstacle course and speedway. So that bump everybody has to go around, but
Yeah.
but we still have that issue with people coming down the road, and the sidewalk is right on the road with no buffer,
Right.
and a lot of people use that. So I think that was the concern.
Yeah, and I think
that
we
direction.
talked about, I think last year we talked about the fact that a previous initiative that was considered and not pursued was a road diet for Jamestown Road, eliminating a lane.
Yeah, and last year we talked about the fact that we had suggested that, and then they repaved it after we suggested it, and
Didn't do it.
never incorporated the
Right.
suggestion. And then we didn't hear exactly why that happened.
Sure, it's I don't know how to say this. I don't know that I would say it's likely, but it's something that we will be asking the city council to consider, is taking that step, perhaps in the next fiscal year, to accommodate Trail 757. And so, the easiest and most economical way to bring a multi-use path or a cycle track, depending upon which design you choose, down Jamestown Road all the way to College Corner is to narrow the roadway. And believe it or not, based on our analysis, it actually fits the entire way without changing the right-of-way. So that's something that we'll be bringing forward to the city council. Hopefully the planning commission will support that when the time comes. We're currently looking at designs of how that looks and how it actually changes the flow of traffic. And then, of course, the question is, which lane do you take, the one going out or the one coming in? So all of that is being considered.
Okay, thank you.
Pardon me, question?
Yeah.
So I've served for a year, and during this time, I've received many questions from the public about, well, what could you do about bike lanes? What could you do about car flow? What could you do about parking? What could you do about sidewalks? What could you do? And I don't know the answers, but I do have this question, and it's something that I kind of peered into over the last couple of weeks. So it was a question around parking, so I went and looked up the parking study from 10 years ago.
2017.
Okay, 8 years ago, whenever it was done, a long time ago, or a good enough time. And what I'm curious about is when you approach a question like Jamestown Road, and you look at it from a sidewalk perspective, or you look at it from a how many lanes, or can we bring 757 trail in, do you ever look at the entirety of Williamsburg and the entirety of movement and say, what really are we going to do? And what I mean by that is, what really are we going to do for bike access? Or what really are we going to do between on-street parking and garage or lot parking? Do you get my?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Okay,
sure.
I'm curious about that.
So the answer is yes, of course we do. The decision to do Trail 757, and this goes back, I think, to what Ms. Bowie was saying, these decisions are not made yesterday, right? And the plan for Trail 757 and the routing for that predates my coming to the city, so that's been 8 years now. And as part of that, there was a holistic review of all possible routes through and around the city and how to get that done. And the decision was made by the stakeholders, which includes the Tidewater Trail Alliance, on which routes made the most sense. Since that time, Reed Nestor, who was the former planning director and an avid biker, spent a tremendous amount of time building the city's pedestrian and biking plan by looking at the whole city. So that's how we got to the design that we have now of where the trail should go. Then I would fast forward and say one of the major components of the proposed CIP that the City Council has asked us to include following the GIO process is to re-engage in the comprehensive plan process. Those of you who were on the Planning Commission for the last comprehensive plan process knows that that can be a pretty arduous process for the Planning Commission, particularly a lot of meetings. Hopefully this process will be a little bit easier. The last one was very intensive on the Planning Commission and the staff because we did it in-house. The idea is this time we will bring in a consultant. And I'm hopeful that's actually going to facilitate an easier path to drafting the plan with a much greater public involvement process. But one of the things that's going to be interesting about this plan is the number of topics the City Council has asked to be included. There's a whole list of components that they want addressed. And one of those things is a complete pedestrian and bicycle plan for the city. And so I think it's a real opportunity that we're not doing these as individual plans, which is usually what happens. I think doing this as all part of one comprehensive package is going to result in a much more fluid path and a series of recommendations that work together as opposed to separately. And so I think at the end of the day, that new comprehensive plan, it's a lot of pressure to put on one document, but I think at the end of it, it's going to serve the city well.
May I follow up?
Sure.
So what's your estimate of the total cycle time from now to that plan?
So we are already working on the RFP. Hope is to get that out first quarter of this year. And then once a contractor is selected, I figure it will take 1.5 years to complete the plan and do it justice. That's just based on my past experience with doing these kinds of plans.
Thank you, Andrew.
So then also on your memo was that we talked about school capacity and addressing that. You asked us to think about affordable housing and implementing more of the workforce housing and affordable housing plans that the city has. There are a couple of those initiatives the City Council addressed in the GIOs that will be reflected in the upcoming CIP. Civic Center redevelopment, we've talked a little bit about that today and making sure that there's a cohesive plan for that. I think that's coming together well. I think the removal of the police station from the library center and allowing this building and the library to work better together in concert with the community building and the community building lawn has really improved our vision for what this could be. And then, of course, broadband. We've really put a lot of effort into attracting competition. And it's funny because a lot of the companies that we talked to about coming into the market who said no suddenly are. I don't know if you're getting the same calls from Verizon that I'm getting, but that's one of the companies that immediately said no, there's not enough revenue in Williamsburg for us to bring Fios. And then as soon as we got a contract with another provider, those companies have all started doing more and installing their infrastructure to provide that service. So I think at the end of the day, we got what we wanted, which was stronger competition for Cox, and now people have a choice. It's not been without its bumps, of course. There's been, the installation of utilities in the city rights of way always causes a lot of concern as they dig up driveways and mark for utilities. But we've worked through a lot of that and actually found that Glow Fiber was a pretty good partner in addressing those concerns when they arose. So that's the direction that we're headed. I'm pretty excited about what we're going to accomplish in the next few years. It's interesting process that we have here where we provide you with a CIP document like we have that's not been vetted by the city council yet. In fact, not even scaled down based on what the departments have. So what you've got in front of you is a raw, unfiltered list of desires from the departments. From that, there will be a lot of things that end up being cut, reduced before I make my suggested CIP to the city council. And then again, the city council will do the same thing as they do their review prior to the budgets being adopted in May. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
I've got just a couple that people have asked me about under public safety, fire station renovations already. Can you elaborate on what that is?
That's worded improperly. So basically, that's money that was remains in that project line, and we are still finishing the construction project, and that's what that money is for. So it's not really renovation.
Not a renovation.
I said the
Okay.
exact same thing to Jack before the meeting started. I said, I hope we're not renovating the fire station already.
Yeah, people are scratching their heads. So there's a listing on page 13, 11, or page 12 for amphitheater. I presume that's the LPV,
Yes.
right? Why are we still calling it amphitheater? That's got people worried. The outdoor amphitheater.
Oh yeah, no, it's just that's what it's called in all the old documents, and we didn't change it.
All the old
But
documents.
it
Yeah,
is
it's-
now
it's
called
spooking
the
some
live
people.
performance
Can we-
venue.
yeah,
It's much
yeah.
more than an amphitheater these days.
Yeah. So where are we with that? Where's the city with that now?
The city council asked the HTRFA to consider that project development, and so since that time, the HTRFA issued a contract with our construction partner to do interim design so that we could cost it out, and that's almost done. We had a meeting yesterday where we're in closed session and reviewed the 20% drawings and the costs associated with it, and talked a little bit about next steps. If the elected officials want to proceed, next steps include some public review in the form of, just like with the sports center, before we even made a decision to proceed, we had to get the planning commission to review the site plan and say this is actually buildable. The same thing has to happen with the ARB, because your review, the ARB's review, seeing as how this facility be in the city, directly impact what the cost is going to be. And so before we can wrap up the interim design and say this is how much it costs to build that concept, we need those approvals. But before we go public with the design, we want to make sure that the elected officials think that we're headed in the right direction.
Do you have any read on the two counties?
You know, I think there is a lot of interest. I think, you know, different than the sports center, there's this group, the advocates for a live performance venue. You all are probably familiar. Some of you may actually be part of that group. And it includes pretty much all of the users of this facility from a community perspective. And they have been instrumental in the process in terms of helping determine what the facilities needed to have to meet their needs. And so I think the advantage of that over the sports center is that built-in advocates that are mostly in the counties themselves, because a lot of those entities are housed in the county. And so I think that helps us. But at the end of the day, there's still going to be the same consternation that occurred over the sports center, where the counties are being asked to do something very difficult. They're being asked to partially fund a project that's not in the county. And so I think it requires a lot of vision and a lot of coordination. We've worked hard to make sure everybody's informed and taking the right steps together. I think that helps us. At the end of the day, though, it's hard to say. I mean, if you just look at York County, they have a relatively new board compared to the one that approved the sports center. And so how are they going to perceive this project? I just don't know. And the same thing can be said for James City County. I think it's just hard to say.
All right, thank you. Other questions?
I have a question about the South Henry Street sidewalk to the Oaks.
Sure.
I know it terminates right now at College Landing Park,
Yes.
but then the Oaks is on the opposite side of the road, and all of that stretch is like pretty,
Yes.
car-centric, for lack of a better word.
Right.
I live in Port Anne with Bud, and so we are right there all the time, and it's a heavily used route for both walkers, which always surprises me, to come around one of the bends and see a person walking, but also bicyclists and the William and Mary track team I frequently see cross-country in big groups, and they will they'll run in the road. So I'm just curious, how logistically is that going to work? Is there going to be a crosswalk at some point to connect those sidewalks? What side of the road is it going to be on?
The vision, because it's not been designed yet, but the vision is that it would actually stay on the side of the road that it's on now and go right up the road along the hillside to 199, or pretty close to it. That was what we had designed. If you rewind the tape on this project, some years ago, and I can't remember how long ago it was now, there was a proposal for a facility, I think it was a memory care facility, that was going to go at the sort of in that open land there on 199 and Henry. And we had negotiated a proffer with that builder that if that got approved, they would actually fund the sidewalks construction. And so we went pretty far down the path to do a lighted sidewalk on that side of the street. And then that evaluation determined that that side was actually less expensive than the other side, given the terrain. And so that's probably what we would do. And the way that we've got it budgeted, it begins design, I think, next year, and then construction thereafter. But it's not an inexpensive sidewalk. It's a very long sidewalk with a lot of terrain and grading to do. So we'll see how that shapes out.
I think a concern when that does, get to the design phase is not just how is the sidewalk going to be, but people fly down that road just like they do on like Jamestown Road coming down to the reservoir. And interestingly, there was a little speed indicator put up, but past our neighborhood, past Port Anne, going into when it turns 25. And I used to see police doing radar on that hill growing up all the time. And I can't tell you if I've seen one in the last 10 years. But that would be a concern of mine, like putting the sidewalks there without also paying attention to the speed issue on that road. And just, some of the corners are effectively blind when you're coming.
Sure.
Actually, this goes to her question, and then it goes back to this comprehensive planning process. Realistically, are there principles that you would put in place before comprehensive planning and then use those principles to inform the choices you make? There might be a principle that says, guess what? Citywide speed limit is 25. End of story, that's it. Then you've got a principle in place that then informs how you solve problems like you're talking about. So I'm really curious about that. Principles that really inform at a planning level, comprehensive engineering, comprehensive policy, comprehensive thinking.
I don't know that I understand the question, Mr. Phillips.
Okay. So right now, people will hit that road. It's easy in the first part of that road, coming off 199 down to College Landing Park. It's easy to be 55, 60. It's easy to be at that speed.
45, no problem.
And 45 is normal, okay? It's easy to get up there. It's actually fast. If you're going to have a crosswalk there at a certain point, that's pretty fast. And so you look at that and you go, all right, well, city speed limits are going to be 35, and we're going to put everything in place that makes sure that people know the speed limit's 35. I've been watching speeds. Right next to the cemetery there where the new speed thing went in, and I've been watching people behave just when I'm walking a dog, okay? About half of the cars actually slow down when they see too fast, right? Half, not all, but half. And they're slowing down to 25 to 30, all right, as opposed, they're at 40 and they're slowing down to 25 to 30. So I'm curious, I'm intensely curious about, the principles that are at play in a comprehensive plan. Like another principle could be, we're going to minimize parking on through streets.
Sure.
We're just going to minimize it. That's the goal, and that's measurable. It's just observable, and so that's kind of on my mind.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think I think I understand the question. Yes, we use principles. There's already a comprehensive plan. The fact that we're writing a new one doesn't mean there isn't already one. Every 5 years we have to do one and have met that goal. And so we're using the principles outlined in that plan to make these decisions today in much the same way that this one will be done. My hope is that this particular comprehensive plan will be much more far-reaching in how many people participate in its input because I think the last one, most of those I think all of those meetings were held here as work sessions with the planning commission. I think there were 25 or
There
something.
were, and some were on Zoom because we were doing
Right, it was
COVID
during
some of that.
COVID, and so the amount of public participation in that plan is concerning. And so I think this will be an opportunity for more people to have a voice and say what they want. And the outcome will be those guidelines for the decisions that the planning commission is making moving forward. So until then, though, we have to use the plan we have.
Yeah, and there's a lot of safety in that, because I completely understand Mr. Phillips' question about that, and your point is exactly right, that is what the comprehensive plan is for, and it sets out all of those overarching principles that we're supposed to follow, that everything under that is supposed to follow, and every decision that we make and the city council make is supposed to follow that plan, and that's usually when I start talking, I said, we have a comprehensive plan and we need to follow it. One of my concerns about having outside consulting firm come in, an expert is just somebody from out of town. Doesn't mean they necessarily have expertise, and so I hope that council is going to be very careful about who they engage, because nobody knows the city better than those of us who live here and work here. And I saw with the housing study, some of the recommendations from those folks from Maryland were just completely, we paid for this. I was kind of disappointed in that, and I hope that with since we have not used a consultant before for the comp plan process, I hope that you will find a way to incorporate public comments more robustly, but I'm not sure how a consultant is going to make any difference in that process, because we put the information out. Planning, Ms. Griffin and her predecessor, were all over social media. Everybody knew, but nobody showed up. So how are we gonna do that? How are we gonna make it, make those changes and keep it consistent? I don't want them to throw out, the principles that we've been functioning under, because it's an iterative process, and the current plan goes back, to the 50s? When did we start?
Yep.
When Mike Chandler told us we have to, Ms. Griffin, Mike Chandler, yeah. I was just mentioning Mike Chandler, your professor and my
That's right.
yeah, my mentor in this. So I hope that there'll be, that the Planning Commission will still be very actively involved in that process, although thankfully.
It'll be your process. You're going to be
Thankfully, I
master
will
of it.
be rotating off that before it gets started. Yeah, since we had work sessions every month for all those 3 years or whatever it was. Mr. Granger was there for every one of them too. Okay, thank you. That's all I have to say on that comp plan. Other questions? I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, that's great to hear.
I just wanted
because,
to add to your.
I did read the current plan.
Yeah.
I don't recall, so I will go back and read again. But I don't recall, let's say the objective, the safety objective or whatever it is, being also articulated as a measurable thing. That to me,
Many of those things are not measurable. Some of them are somewhat subjective. Yeah.
Yeah, and
You're
I
right.
think that the subjective, great, and measurable, superb. So that's what's on my mind right now, because I know that I will be lost as a contributor trying to reconcile the desires of bikers, walkers, and drivers. I'll be lost. What are you talking about? I have no idea how to prioritize. I have no idea how to blend and mix and compromise. What are we talking about?
Sure.
So I'm just speaking plainly. So
Whichever one of those groups yells the loudest, that's what you do.
That is
We have
generally how it
another
works.
constituency, which is the state of Virginia.
Good.
So part of
Yeah.
South Henry Street is state of Virginia. It's VDOT, right? It's 132?
I think anything inside the city is maintained by the city. There's only a few exceptions to that.
Oh, okay. Because I remember when we talked about Strawberry Plains.
Right.
That was a huge issue.
Strawberry Plains, is right
It's
on
right
the
on
line.
the edge, okay.
But generally speaking, with very few exceptions,
Yeah.
if it's inside the city, it's maintained by the city.
I have something that's probably off topic, but Highland Park.
Sure.
It's been a couple of years since I've been in Highland Park, and I just remembered at the time, this seems to be a neighborhood that really needs some additional support. And I think that there are a lot of investors coming in from out of town and buying up houses and making it hard for the neighborhood to remain as it was. And that's a concern that weighs on me of what do we need to do to help preserve a really important neighborhood like Highland Park. And I don't know if this is the right meeting for it, but it's sure on my mind.
No, I'm glad you brought it up. There's actually 2 CIP projects that address that concern, but it's a really interesting topic for the Planning Commission, and that is the delicate balance between providing better infrastructure for the neighborhood and not at the same time creating an incentive for additional investment that forces people out, right? And maybe forces people out is the wrong word, because what you find is people who live in Highland Park, some, not all, are counting on their value increasing, and that's their exit strategy. That's their nest egg. When they no longer need to live in Highland Park, they're going to sell that home, make a tidy profit, and go somewhere else. But the 2 projects that are in the plan that deal with this, one is the application for a CDBG grant, a Community Development Block Grant, that would assess interest in another grant program that would provide funding for people to make improvements to their homes so that they can age in place. Now, the way that grant program typically works is you agree to live there for some period of time, and that when you sell the home in that time period, you won't make more than this profit. And when you think about that, that can be a hard sell to some folks, right? And so part of this process is understanding, is that going to be attractive or not, before we go down the path of applying for the grant and tying up the state money and the federal money in this case to do it. The second one is a much more expensive proposition. The community, the city staff, has been attending the Highland Park Civic Association since I came to the city. And a recurring request has been, we need better sidewalks and stormwater management. And so we asked the Public Works Department a few years ago to better understand what that would look like. And Mr. Reed and the department have come up with a plan that we're going to be finalizing and then workshopping with the neighborhood to see what their level of interest is. Because when you start talking about putting in formal sidewalks, curb and gutter, and maybe even storm drains, that's a very expensive proposition for the city, but also very disturbing to the neighborhood for a period of time. I mean, this is not a simple process to do that for every street in the neighborhood. At the same time, that creates more value and will make it more desirable for investors to come in and buy houses and turn them into rental properties. And so I think that part of our process is getting the plan finalized enough that we can have a meeting with the community and say, this is how this would impact your house, your front yard, and then ask the community if they want us to do it or not. And that's what we've been working toward. So I think those 2 programs together, it'll be interesting to see how the community out there receives them.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, so one of the main purpose I think of this work session is for us to discuss the letter that we will be sending to the city manager this year. We have the letter from last year, and I don't think it was included in our packet. I have a copy of it, and Mr. Trivet just went through all of it. Safety, school capacity, affordable housing, civic center redevelopment, and broadband were the overarching items that we made recommendations. Is there anything there that we feel like should be or could be deleted? Anything that you feel comfortable that it's done, it doesn't need to be emphasized going forward?
I do have a question for Mr. Trivet. Do you feel that the broadband project has reached enough maturity that we could drop that from this letter, or we want to keep it on there?
I think that's a complex question. I think that what the Planning Commission wanted to accomplish has been accomplished. One of the things that's a priority for the city that's relative to the broadband conversation is we really feel like broadband is the next public utility, and we want to be ready for that transition. And so there's still work to do. We're working with partners on how does that work for us, what could that look like. Particularly T-Mobile has been really receptive to the idea of how we might facilitate that. So there's still work being done on that regard, but in terms of providing competition and offering the service more generally, I think we've accomplished that. You know, the Glow Fiber update is that they have just about installed fiber everywhere that they can. The one hurdle that remains for them, and it's a big hurdle, I don't mean to imply it's small, is negotiating with the individual HOAs that have private streets and private rights-of-ways where the city's franchise agreement doesn't allow them to go. And so it's just a slow process. I'm sure that all of those neighborhoods will eventually agree. The HOAs probably want the service, but it takes time to negotiate that based on, HOAs that don't necessarily have a formal structure. And so, ultimately, I think we probably accomplished the vision of what was in the letter.
So do you feel comfortable removing that? Any objection to?
One more question.
Of course.
So in your discussion of broadband, are you also including in that vision wireless broadband and public access and the broadly defined, not just fiber in the ground, but broadly defined?
In fact, we didn't envision fiber in the ground. I sort of felt like that was last year's technology. So, yes, we're definitely focused on Wi-Fi and wireless transmission.
Based on
So
that,
maybe
I'd
we should
keep it.
leave it, maybe we should revise it to sort of incorporate that so that it doesn't look like the same exact thing. Ms. Griffin, did you get that? You'll get
Yes.
that from the recording. Okay, so if you could amplify that just a bit and make it a little more future looking, because I think that's important. Anything else to be removed? Okay, additions. Mr. Granger, would you like something about Highland Park to put some emphasis on that? Because I certainly don't disagree with your.
Yeah, yes, but I don't know what. Just,
It could be something. It could be something like examine and solicit recommendations for improvements in the Highland Park infrastructure. Something along those lines.
explore ways to secure fragile neighborhoods such as Highland Park.
Okay.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, because I would
I like
say that also includes, like, Pinecrest is a little bit more on the cusp of falling.
And Wales is, and, the big real estate investment firms from across the country, they're just looking to buy up neighborhoods and so that's part of it, but there's a lot of infrastructure that I think is long past due for specifically Highland Park and Wales.
Okay, so that's three. We can go ahead, and is that enough for you, Ms. Griffin, to put a paragraph together?
Yes, I have it.
And if thoughts, the way this typically works is if after, usually our best ideas come to us after we're, in the parking lot. You can certainly add, email Ms. Griffin. Don't email everybody because that turns into a meeting, but just email Ms. Griffin and say, I'd like this added, and she can let us know if there's objections, but I'm sure there won't be. Okay, so that's important. What else?
I'd really like to see, we've got a couple of renovations of playgrounds in here, like the playground being replaced at Highland Park, some improvements, although you said things are paused with the quarter path facility, but still being improved on the playground side,
the
like
outdoor side.
I really find that important right now as a young parent. I wish that there were more playgrounds in kind of like a more pocket park type. They don't all have to be like a new quarter path park or a Kiwanis Park, but like something, of a smaller fashion that could dot the area a little bit more and serve, different, smaller areas of the community. I think that College Landing Park is ripe for like a tiny little playground. I know that the terrain is not ideal, and I don't know where the actual property line of the city is delineated, if there's space for that, but something on that side of the city would be great. A splash pad somewhere would be incredible. Like we have, if you can pay to get into Busch Gardens, there's a splash pad over there for your toddlers. But there's nothing like that in town unless you go all the way out to James City County, the Chickahominy Park, there's one there, but then you have to pay for it. And those kinds of things, whenever you have, the admissions prices, it's a barrier to entry for, low and moderate income folks. I'd love to consider if there's room in the recreation, space to add where we can and to improve in some some other ways for our youngest citizens.
So we do have a new park in the plan. Peacock Park, designed for Peacock Hill. It's designed to be a children's park. Expected cost of about $6.5 million, and does include a splash pad feature. So
And where would that be?
it would be at the vision is that it would be at the corner of Henry and Prince George Street. So right
I
across from
remember
the
you
parking
telling me
garage.
about that last year, Tavia.
I'm sorry, Henry and Scotland, right across from
Yeah.
the parking garage.
That would be fantastic.
So, so if we're going to add an item about that,
I would love to have that, yeah.
yeah, can we, pocket parks, explore opportunities for pocket parks and emphasize that particular project. And please don't bring up splash pads, because
If there's already one in the works, that's fine.
well, do you remember the P3, the whole P3
Yeah.
thing? Yeah. There was people
Taking away
lined up
splash
with torches. Okay, other things that we would like to add. I'm gonna just circle back to the comprehensive plan, and I want to. It's so important, and really to Mr. Phillips's point, I want to make sure that council. I would like for city council to let one of us be involved in interviewing, vetting the contractors, and I don't know if that's the appropriate place to put this, but we can put whatever we want in it. But I think because one of us, and I can appoint somebody to do that, to be part of that.
It's largely the planning commission's process.
It is, and that's why we want to make sure we're comfortable with whoever ends up being the consultant, so.
I'm excited about the RFP process. I'm usually surprised, but I think we're going to get a very strong response from bidders, because I would imagine from a planning perspective, being able to do a plan in a city like Williamsburg is very desirable. So
Yeah, I would
I think it'll be, I think the planning commission is going to have a lot to choose from.
Yeah, and I think that you'll have the pick of the litter for very good planning firms that have done very good comprehensive plans. So a little bit of background, if you guys didn't, if I never introduced myself properly, I worked for about 5 years in West Virginia, basically doing comprehensive plans for communities across the state with the WVU Law School Land Use and Sustainable Development Law Clinic. It's a lot of words. But so I have a lot of experience going into communities that I'm not, a member of, and helping them with their comprehensive planning process. And I see a lot of value in having basically experts on that kind of process be able to guide both the planning department and us, the planning commissioners, to create a really amazing document that does hold us accountable, like you're trying to get at, for the next 5 years. And really does get the public input, and they have, you guys have done a fantastic job in the last couple years. I've seen at the Future Festivals, but a lot of outside firms really have a pulse on how do you get the public to engage, and because they're doing this all the time, all the time, they're really experts at getting the message out there, and they typically do see high engagement rates, at least the processes that I've been a part of. And so with a good planning firm, I'm pretty confident that we'll end up with a strong comprehensive plan next year.
You just volunteered yourself to be involved in the
absolutely.
vetting process, because you've got that expertise, and that's we're so happy to have you here. But can we make sure that she, as representing the planning commission, that she's involved in going through
Yeah, I'd love that.
the responses to the RFP? That would be great.
Although at some point, we definitely do need, I think, a presentation from, maybe the finalists at some point to the whole planning commission.
Yep, great idea. Okay, anything else to go into the CIP letter? Okay, I'm not hearing anything else. That's the end of our discussion. We have an open forum. We have crowds of people. Our clerk is left with all of the speakers' cards. Anything to say? No. Okay. Then I'll close the open forum. Anything else that we need to discuss today? Anything else from staff? Thank you very much for that presentation. Appreciate it, and for the answers to our questions. And we are adjourned.
Thank you.